Good morning. It's July 11th. We're here for our regular scheduled commissioner meeting. And in the chamber, we have all three commissioners. We have our administrator and the clerk of the board. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. The first item on the agenda is the vouchers. We have no minutes to approve today. Oh, yes, and I'd like just to announce that there won't be any phone call public comment today because of our staffing. We're a little bit under the weather right now on staffing, so today, if only in-house, we don't have anybody manning the phones downstairs. Go ahead, Mr. Mullen.
Okay. So on the fund expenditures this morning, we're going to be releasing some of the ARPA money, and so the total is going to be larger than normal. So move for approval of fund expenditures in a total amount of $3,419,804.53 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in a total amount of $1,169,293.07 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Takes us down to the consent agenda. There are 5 items on the consent agenda.
Move for approval of consent agenda items 1 through 5 as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for the 5 consent items with no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Takes us down to the regular business, which is approval to hire corrections deputy at step 6. And it doesn't have presenter down here. Is there somebody presenting this? Sheriff?
Commissioners, I recognize that you probably are a little concerned about this request, but as a way to present the request, Renee Rafihi is a immigrant from Iraq who speaks multiple different dialects of Farsi. She worked for Franklin County as a corrections deputy, and when she left, she was a senior deputy. She is an academy graduate of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission in Corrections, and she's also a graduate of the Law Enforcement Academy here in the state. She left us to move to Detroit, Michigan, where she's been working as a Detroit police officer, and she's apparently had enough of that and has contacted me and asked if she could return to the corrections, to our jail, and come back to work. And for me, it's a no-brainer, absolutely. She has all the background, all the training. She left here in good standing as a senior corrections deputy. Makes sense to bring her back at that level, considering our hiring problems that we have right now. Currently today, I believe I sent you an email where there's approximately we have 10 openings with no bodies right now to fill, and an additional, I think it's like 10 more that we're in a background process. So female, multiple dialects, in Farsic, a tremendous background, and so we want to bring her back as a senior corrections deputy.
Questions?
Just an observation. I've made comments on virtually every one of these step correction requests that we've got when you want to hire new people, and I apply the same test each time: is where's the logic in it? Where's the benefit to the taxpayers of Franklin County to justify bringing somebody in at a 4 or 5, a 6, a 7 versus the entry level? Given that employees who come in at the entry level, I think rightly deserve to have some understanding of why somebody else comes in at 6 and they come in at a 1. 15 years of doing this, I think this is the strongest case I've seen for bringing somebody in at a higher step. Now, I don't know, we don't have a great number of Arabic speakers in our community. We have some, and the various dialects of Farsi probably won't get used, but nevertheless, it shows a breadth of experience. And in particular, I think this individual, who I don't know, I suspect that their value to the county improved by spending that time in Detroit more than it would have if they had been here the full time. So I think we get value out of that experience too. So,
Well, you couldn't pay me all the tea in China to work for Detroit PD.
well,
so.
just saying, we are looking for the best people with applicable experience, and given the shortage, especially for female corrections officers, I agree with you. It's a no-brainer. Thanks.
So, Sheriff, when she left, what step was she at?
She was at top step.
The same step she's coming back at?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And there's no impact to the budget in
No.
any way with all the openings that we have.
Exactly. All right. Commissioner Mullen, any questions?
No, that was my only question, is that she's returning at the same rate she left, so. Move for approval of Resolution 2023-197 as presented.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second for Resolution 2023-197. Without any further discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right. That takes us down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment?
George Dockstetter. I want to thank Mr. Gonzalez for reaching out to me, and I submitted a request for the information I've been asking for public records, and I want to thank him for working with me, and hopefully I'll have that in the next couple of weeks. But there's two things that really irked me the most about the assessor's office. Is he sat up here and said we can't change and go back and reassess properties. Well, Commissioner Peck last week after the meeting told me his has been reassessed, and over the 4th of July weekend at a barbecue, 3 other property owners on the river said they had their property reassessed since the original assessment. So it sounds to me like the assessor's office is playing favoritism for all the rich people that live on the river and sticking it to the rest of us. I don't know what they were reassessed at, and I don't care. But he stood right here and said, we can't reassess. And that's a crock, because he did it. And the other thing he said is your taxes aren't gonna go up. Well, I just sat down and figured out mine through the treasurer's office. My property went up 20% last year, and my taxes at this year's levy rate are going up $1,400. And you guys aren't gonna lower the damn levy rate enough to make up for $1,400. So I wished he'd quit lying, resign his position, and get somebody in there to tell the truth.
Thank you. Is there anybody else for public comment?
Good morning. Franklin County Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you. I'm here on behalf of COPA, Colima Pasco. My name is Gabriel Portugal. I'm the president of the Colima Pasco Collaboration and Friendship Association. Last year, in September, we had a visitation from the state of Colima officials. And I'm here to share with you, leave this book with you that has our beautiful courthouse. I'm sure many of us agree this is one of the most beautiful courthouses in the state. And we're really, really proud that and thankful to you for allowing the delegation to be with us on Friday the 23rd, September, last year. So I'm on behalf of the Colima Pasco. Thank you very much, and I'm here to give this to you. Let me know to the clerk.
Sure.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Is there anybody else for public comment?
Morning. Chris Hollingsworth.
Good morning.
Last week, I believe the assessor said, when he was talking about adjustments and fee appraisers, he said that the adjustments are subjective, and that shows to me the ignorance of our assessor, because anybody who's dealt with appraisal knows that the adjustments are market-based. They're not created. They're determined through paired sales analysis, generally. But to somebody who doesn't understand how appraisals work, I could see why he would say they're subjective, because they do look made up. I know years ago when I started appraising, I thought they were all made up until I learned that they're based on market data. It just speaks volumes to me. Just, I've said it before, they don't know what they don't know. To them, it's made up numbers. You know, the chief appraiser a few weeks back said that they keep putting the data in the model until it spits out a number that doesn't get rejected. It's trial and error. They don't know. You know, I feel that the staff in the office are passionate what they're doing. They think they're doing it right because that's what they've been taught and told. It's a lack of leadership. You know, for contrast, I believe that there were over 300 appeals this year. Last year, Benton County had 4. Triple the size, 4. Roughly, I asked the assessor, and he's like, off the top of his head, he thought there was 4. That's a huge difference. And there's a difference of leadership and knowing what they're doing versus not. I hope they can figure something out, whether that's education, I'm hopeful that the person that he was trying to get approved last week did come on, because that's a certified general. That will be the only person in the assessor's office with fee experience, any appraisal experience. So hopefully that person does come on and can help turn the office around. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment?
Hi, guys. Lori Hales. I would have been here last week, but I was volunteering to be on standby for the Freedom Rodeo, which was amazing. So I had to write this down so I get everything ready for a lot of gushiness. Okay. We would like to extend our gratitude for your support and commitment. I'm going to try not to cry. To the only EMS service in over half of Franklin County. With the ARPA funds you approved for us last week, we will be able to initiate essential updates to our ambulances and acquire necessary equipment to enhance the safety of our dedicated volunteers and improve the quality of patient care we deliver. As the sole ambulance service, we serve over 715 square miles. Our responsibility to the community is paramount. With over 714 calls last year, that was a 21% increase in call volume over the last 2 years. The demand for service continues to grow. Our dedicated team of volunteers work tirelessly and give up selflessly of their family time and work to serve over 12,500 individuals, ensuring their well-being during times of medical emergencies. Since our formation in 1945, we have upheld a strong commitment to fiscal responsibilities. We have never burdened our community with a tax increase, maintaining financial balance while delivering critical care to those in need. With the increased cost of inputs and call volume, our funds and volunteers are almost tapped out. Thanks to the ARPA Fund grant, we will only be asking for a levy lid lift this November of 22 cents. This is a minimal increase necessary to sustain our operations and meet the evolving needs of our community. With our lid lift, we will be able to hire a full-time working chief, which is long overdue, and hopefully two full-time employees to assist our current volunteers. We will still keep our volunteers, and renovate current buildings and sleeping quarters. Once again, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the other two commissioners for helping us ensure our ambulance service remains at the forefront of our emergency medical care and delivering life-saving support to the residents of our community. Thank you, Lori Hales, Commissioner of the Franklin County Public Hospital District Number 1, but most importantly, I am an EMT, and that is where my heart is. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, and thank you for all that you and the other volunteers do. Is there anybody else for public comment? Seeing nobody, we'll move to Commissioner Administrator updates. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. First, thanks, Gabriel, for bringing the book by from COPA. I shot a lot of those pictures, as a matter of fact, and it's a beautiful book, but I do want to talk about COPA a little bit. It's a really influential group. I've been a part of it since my Franklin PUD days. Truly a partnership between the City of Pasco, the Port of Pasco, stakeholders, and what the connection is we have so many people from Colima, Mexico, here in the City of Pasco, so we truly have an incredible connection. So the port's doing some economic development with COPA. The City of Pasco is supporting the endeavor, and last year you guys allowed us to use the courthouse for just an incredible visit from the delegation from Colima, Mexico. So we'll thank you again on that, and we were able to put together an incredible concert with the Mid-Columbia Symphony. So that's a lot of people ask what COPA is. So it's really fostering that relationship with our Colimans here from Colima, Mexico. So just it really is a special group of disparate people, different races, political affiliations, all for the love of Colima, Mexico. So that's a really beautiful book. Other updates here in the courthouse. This has gotten quite a bit of press. The AG is going to give a formal opinion on the constitutionality of the VIBA conversions, so we'll see how that plays out. Good news in the PA's office. They're starting to fill a lot of those positions, and the retention pay was received really well, so it's been nice to work with Sean's group and see the morale boosting in that area. Working with the Treasurer's Office to create an internal .09 fund policy, so hopefully we can get creative with some of those funds. The HAPO RFP, so far we don't have anyone that's submitted. That RFP submittal, it closes Friday, so looking forward to see who submits, and we'll take it from there. Civil service, it's nice to have Ray Gomez and Mark Jansen here, who were reappointed on that consent agenda. So they're going to get right to work because there's a civil service meeting today. So I was glad those gentlemen were willing to come back and serve our community, because both are really great men and just good people, and we're certainly lucky to have them. Excited to announce that Maria Perez, who's here, is starting in our office. So we're excited to have her, and it's kind of going around the courthouse, so this isn't breaking news or anything. Teresa Alvarez will be our new clerk of the court, so she'll move from the auditor's office into our office, so we're excited about that. The consort study ready to begin. We've got our elected official and we've got our department head meeting today, so they'll punch into our meeting and get things started. So certainly keeping busy. We've got some changes going on, but I think a lot of changes for the better.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck.
Not sure if this was a great week or a bad week, but I had 3 meetings scheduled and all 3 of them canceled. So to those organizations that didn't need to meet this week, thank you. Had some interesting conversations with North County farmers in the dryland wheat business who tell me that drought conditions are unusually difficult and have posed the notion that perhaps at some point Franklin County might look for a way to try and support their efforts for either state or federal grant monies or subsistence of some kind. It would be the first, to my recollection, for us to do something like that, but I would ask the board to start thinking about the idea of some sort of a disaster drought declaration just at the county level. Candidly, it's not going to have any authority or ability to direct the state or anybody else to give us any money, but it does draw attention to it. I realize this is not the only concern in the ag community, but I know that the organizations that the grain growers and wheat growers are both looking at different avenues to bring attention to the drought issue at the state level. And so we just ask that we start thinking about, in the next week or two, maybe a declaration. You gentlemen both have more ag experience than I do, so I'd look to you to maybe flesh out what that looks like. County administrator could draft something, and then for my part, I'll be talking with folks in the state legislature and through WASAC to see if there are vehicles that something like that might play out. Admittedly, it's not going to be an easy lift to get the state to pony up money, but you don't ask, you don't get. So I think we ought to take a shot at it. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen.
So this last week, we had the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health report. No complaints. On-time percentages were all good. I just want to make note that they do have a recovery cafe in Kennewick. That's a place that people can go get coffee, computer, internet service. They offer free basic classes on taking care of themselves, service skills, and other services that are provided to get homeless people a chance to improve themselves. Also, the Greater Columbia Behavioral Health is going to be looking for a new medical director. The current one is retiring. So, and then also just want to mention that the Sheriff's Department has the night out coming up August 1st, which is a Tuesday. So that'll be in Basin City Memorial Park. Anyways, that's my update for this week.
Okay, my update was the veterans meeting was canceled, and we haven't had one for about 3 weeks, so I'm getting concerned there. I'm going to reach out and make sure we have one next week. Had the Columbia River Policy Ag Advisory Group meeting last week. Had numerous phone calls from concerned citizens about roads. Green Acres Road, again, is broke through. When it breaks through, there's a surface of gravel. When it breaks through, then there's just dirt there, and I guess it's pretty bad. And it's going to get a lot of traffic this time of year because we got hay moving. We got potato harvest is soon to begin here, if it hasn't already in some areas. Hope Valley Road has a breakthrough on it. Hooper Road has a breakthrough on it. So I'm going to get a hold of Mr. Erdman and tell him that we need to get out and start driving these roads and get these roads up to standards for the harvest that's coming up. I'd like to thank Mark and Ray for reapplying. Thank you for your service. And this is a requirement. We have to have this, and I appreciate you coming back on board. The department head meeting today, as one of the other two commissioners going to attend that. It's at noon, correct, Mike?
Yes, sir.
Is who's on, I attended the last one, so I was just curious.
Rocky, so Commissioner Peck, if he's available, would be today.
At 12?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, if one of those would attend that. Also received an email about the Department of Ecology is giving out millions of dollars for clean water. I think also we should look into that for Basin City and for some of these people that applied for ARPA funds for wells. Maybe there's some funds there we can get from that Department of Ecology for helping out their wells in Basin City, Mesa, some of the surrounding towns. And then I just want to give a big shout out again to the Freedom Rodeo. Drove up there and just looked at the grounds that they've put together. It's incredible. They didn't have any bleachers this last year. They do have a lot of lawn on the side hill for people to attend. But I think this is an avenue where we, the commissioners, like Commissioner Peck just suggested for the drought, we should be looking at our .09 funds for this venue because it is a sanctioned national event now. And I think that we need to partner up and work with these .09 funds. And I got some people looking into the logistics of it to see if we can do it. But maybe helping them getting some bleachers put in, a parking lot. We need to get access off of 170. There's just a lot of things that we could help them in making this even more successful. And those .09 funds are for economic development, and I know that this is part of it. And so I think that that's something we ought to be looking into, helping the Freedom Rodeo to grow even bigger and just a shining star out here in the middle of nowhere. Everybody said they were calling to find out where it was at, all the riders, the #1 bull rider. They were phone calling Cameron Jinks and saying, how do we get there? Where is it? Because I got to drive out in the middle of nowhere to get to this event, which is a really neat event. And I'm so thankful that those people up north got this going. So that's the end of my update. We'll move on to the elected and department head. Anybody want to present?
Commissioners, if we could just hold on a couple minutes until Marcus gets the USB plugged in for the presentation. But the presentation that I'm going to give, number one, concerns last week's financial slides that were presented by the auditor's office. And I'm going to give you a take on the other side of that. It was concerning to me that dollars came up on the sign and that the sheriff's office was at the top, not in compliance with budgets. And of course, everything has an explanation. Facts versus false narratives sometimes can reach up and bite you in the butt. So, and then secondly, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about per diem and policy and actions of other electeds.
Well, Sheriff, just in regards to that, is there a pending lawsuit?
Nope, not a pending lawsuit. I
Nope.
filed a claim. There's a difference between a claim and a lawsuit, and
Yes, there is.
there's nothing that stops me, even if it was a lawsuit, from presenting, and so that's what I'm going to do.
Well, there would be, because it would be a conflict of interest. We can't hear it when there's a pending lawsuit. And you were threatening to sue us, so I was just curious if that was, I've got the emails.
You're still wrong.
I've got the
Yeah,
emails.
so I get it. I'm gonna present, and then we'll go from there. Are we ready? Facts versus false narrative, commissioners. My very first meeting, once taking office, occurred with the chairman of the board of the county commissioners. The commissioner was quick to point out that all things financial, contracts, countywide policy began and ended at the commissioner's office. I took heart to that. My perceptions of these conversations, which were multiple, translated for me as the commissioners giveth and the commissioners taketh away the dollar. Another significant meeting in 2015 was with the auditor when the auditor was threatening to turn off my P cards because I wasn't following the game plan. At the meeting was the auditor, his accountants, myself, and Keith Johnson, who was there representing the three commissioners of the board at the time. During those conversations and meetings, the auditor was upset because I was staying within per diem guidelines, but I was actually submitting a receipt for business travel, et cetera, et cetera. And so during that meeting, a decision was apparently made not to shut off my P card, as it's a financial instrument to the office of sheriff, and it's used to operate the sheriff's office. And it didn't occur. But I'm certainly willing to provide you with, from 2016 through 2023, receipts where we were approved my methods, and I'll also provide you some emails from the accounting office where arrangements and explanations were made for each business trip, and they were approved and paid for. Past practice is important. So, as I spoke earlier, the budget and putting up the sheriff's office was $187,000 over budget, was concerning for me. So the next slide, which is an overview of the budget in years, becomes very important. The truth matters. Honor, integrity, and trust of core values matters when you're dealing with the public. So I want to make sure that they have both sides of the equation. Getting old, got to put on my glasses there, commissioners. In 2015, the first column, and 16 through 22, the first columns are approved expenditures. The next column is actual expenditures. The next column is revenues over and under in the budgets, and the total over and unders in the budgets from now to 2023. The next line, the very last line, is the grants, contracts, which some of you were signers on, shows the revenue that has been brought in through the men and women of the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, and that totals a little over $1.8 million that has come back into the county's coffers over the past years. And in the end, if you look at the numbers and the bottom line budgets, as some commissioners like to talk about, you'll find that I was never over in any budget. In fact, in most occasions, money was returned. But that money returned actually goes into the general budget and doesn't reflect the numbers of a budget that comes in from the assessor's office. Next slide. So here are some examples of why there would be cost overruns or overages, et cetera, for the 540 budgets, which are the jail budgets, and some of the reasonings why the numbers were skewed in 2022. Again, the sheriff's office, we have over the years acquired grants for rigid inflatable boats, $214,000. 66% of that paid by a FEMA grant and 34% paid by VFR funds. A command trailer with a side-by-side at $310,000, 60% ARPA funds, 10% FEMA grants. Shallow water rescue boats, same scenario, outlines it. Our drone program, body cameras, which were mandated by law, which occurred, 75%, and so on. You can look at each of those. The most recent one is the body scanner that we use on inmates. I returned $180-some of ARPA funds back to the county, and
180,000, right?
yeah, 180,000, yeah, and returned those back to the county and utilize a different form by contract to get the body scanner covered at no cost to the county. Okay. Next slide. Of course, administrative fees, they create some of the overruns, and I'll give you some examples. The sheriff's office goes out and buys gasoline on a P card, by the way, puts it in the patrol cars, and we consume so much gas a month. Well, based on the gallons and percentages that we consume, well, the shops, and I'm okay with this, other than it makes no sense. The shops then charges an admin fee of 13% that totals $2,000, and it goes back. It goes on my book as a negative in the budget. So there's all kinds of variables, is the point. So the next item, as we go to the next slides, concerns P card usage. Again, I can provide you any receipts you'd like, but this is an example of how I saved the county money using my P card and didn't take advantage of anybody. And some things are important when you're reading GSA guidelines, like per diem means per day. Doesn't mean anything else. There's nothing in the GSA guidelines that says I have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there's nothing in the GS guidelines that says I have to show that I spent the money on such things. The only guideline says this is how much you get and how much you get to pocket, and it's up to you to decide without receipts. From day one when I walked in as the sheriff, I never did that because I wanted to avoid these type of situations. So, next slide. So on this specific trip, on your left-hand column, this is what I could have charged the county and the taxpayers, $936. This is what I charged the taxpayers for this trip, $93.47. So,
Hey, Sheriff, for everybody's benefit, would you mind breaking down that first column? Because I'm not sure that many people listening are going to understand
Sure.
the dollar amounts.
So on Sunday, I traveled on my own time. I could have jumped on an airplane and flew over to Seattle. And I could have took full per diem for the day. And then you have extra incidentals like cab rides and all those type of things that you'd factor in for some of those breakdowns. Monday was an actual day that we conducted business. Because we worked the whole day, Tuesday was canceled. Because we finished up, we worked late. I stayed on Monday in a hotel room until 3:30 in the morning. Then I got up and drove home, showered, and went to work. And then, of course, it was scheduled for 4 days in total. So I could have put in for per diem costs for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and added all those things up, and for lack of better words, soaked the county for $936, but I didn't.
But really only if the conference ran the full length, right? If the conference ended
Well, this wasn't a
early.
conference, this was a business trip. I'm a presiding member on the decertification panels for the state of Washington.
So the meeting ended early.
Yeah, it is.
So you
Finished
really,
up.
so you really, knowing your integrity, could not have charged for all those days.
No,
The
but
meeting
I
ended.
could have. I
Well,
could have.
Not without breaching your integrity.
Well, that's what's important, isn't it? So here we go on this side. So I traveled on Sunday on my own time, over the pass, through the snow, all those type of things, and went and ate at Elmer's. not the roof of the rid path, Elmer's. And I provided receipts. You'll find no alcohol, none of those type of things that would violate any type of per diem guidelines. And then the same thing Monday when we finished, because of traffic, et cetera, I stayed the night and had dinner. That's it. That's what I consume. And then the rest of the days, in order to save the taxpayers' dollars, that's what I did. So, next slide. Travel policy that the county has is important, and words and sentences are important in those travel policies. You'll notice it says elected official department head is responsible. And then meals and incidentals, appropriate GSA rates. Meals, incidentals can be paid through the use of a P card. The use of P cards for employee travel is seen as a cost-saving measure. In conjunction with the P card policy, receipts are required for all transactions, or they are considered non-reimbursable. Meals or incidentals acquired through the P card, which are in excess appropriate GSA rates, which I could argue I was in GSA rates, will only be reimbursed up to the allowable reimbursement. All additional amounts will be the employee's responsibility on the P card. Next one. This is part of your travel policy, and you'll notice that how the meals are broke down, and you'll notice that there's no guidelines that says, Sheriff, you have to eat breakfast, and you have to eat lunch, and you have to eat dinner in order to stay in the GSA guidelines for per diem. And most of this that's in your policy actually addresses federal employees, not county employees. Next slide. And here's an example of past practice. This is one of many emails that I've put in public disclosure requests for, which shows the accounting practices that have been going on for, what, nearly 8 years now. Next slide. And again, this is the most recent one, and I'll highlight for you out of the accounting office. For Raymond, since he went over GSA rates for meals, that's arguable. We just need an explanation on the lower left side of the form, which is what's been being done for years now. Next slide. And just so I have pictures and copies of every one of these receipts and all the exceptions or non-exceptions, et cetera, which shows you this is how I typically do business as the sheriff in the county and have done for quite some time. Go ahead, next slide. So what's changed in 2023? Do we have an auditor playing watchdog and accusing others of inappropriate behavior? Do we have an auditor overextending his authority upon other elected officials? GS guidelines and instructions being manipulated to better serve an auditor's viewpoint instead of following the plain language of per diem rules established by the GSA and county policy? I'll let you read the rest as you go along. I won't take it very long, any further other than it's readable, and I'll make it presentable to the public if and when there needs to be. So, bottom one that's it's a little concerning to me is that I have come out and asked my prosecutor, well, aren't you by law supposed to be representing me too, as well as the rest of the elected officials? But I'll let this one speak for itself. Next page. So, as a sheriff, I'm willing to resolve this issue based on some conditions. Direct the auditor's office to refund my $21.47, my $21.47. Reactivate all purchasing cards assigned to the office of sheriff. Agree to send, or you cannot agree, I guess it's up to you. Agree to send Franklin County travel policy and related audit procedures to the Attorney General's office for review. and legal opinion on whether an elected auditor has the authority to make policy that affects another elected official. Commissioners agree to retain their appropriate authority in setting county policy and will reinstate the past practice that all elected officials sign off on county policies. So way back when the commissioners created policies that affected elected offices and instructions and all those type of things, the electeds and the department heads signed off on those policies, so everybody was in agreement. I challenge you to look and see where that's been done with county policies. You have the authority to create and approve county policies, not an auditor's office. I have the authority as the sheriff to institute policy for the office of sheriff and the sheriff's office and our corrections division currently. So I need you to retain your appropriate authority, which is real simple. Turn the P card on and don't let it get turned off again, and reimburse me my $21. There is a thing called due process, don't you know? Make a public statement, Franklin County Board of Commissioners does not condone restricting the lawful exercise of anyone's First Amendment rights by any member of the Franklin County government. Okay, next page. Some more questions. Does the auditor have statutory authority to control the financial instruments of an independently elected? I think the question will be answered that no, they don't, but hey, let's do a legal review. Does an auditor have authority to arbitrarily change GSA rules that the Board of County Commissioners has set as travel policy? And that goes for the same with instructions. You can't take a set of federal instructions on how to fill out a federal form and then change it to retrofit it to work for your cause and then call it policy. Does it violate the law to simultaneously use social media websites for official business and campaign activity? Does it violate the law to restrict the ability for selective citizens to comment on matters of public concern? Does the law require the prosecutor's office to provide legal advice to all county officials? A couple examples of arguments of money and people's responsibilities and their authorities. Blaisdell versus Franklin County, this is the coroner. Killian versus the Franklin County Superior Court judges in Franklin County. As examples where some of these things were argued and decided. Next slide. Can the Board of County Commissioners relinquish their legislative policy-making authority to the auditor's office? Do the commissioners have the authority to call an executive session for the purpose of allowing a county employee to bring complaints against the elected sheriff? Does the subordinate commission, civil service, have the authority to go into executive session in order to hide public documents from the sheriff? Can an individual commissioner or board chair restrict an independently elected official's access to the county human resources? Access. Can the commissioners order legal review in executive session against the office of sheriff? Any other questions the Board of County Commissioners may have for the AG? Well, where they believe that I've overstepped my authority, please submit those too for review. Next page. So, as the elected sheriff of Franklin County, I believe in following the law and the Constitution. I also believe that transparency is important, a very important element for government. It's for the people, by the people, remember all that? I take my oath and duties very serious, and I hope that every other elected official does as well. If my actions have adversely impacted the required duties of any other independently elected official of this county, I welcome their requests for review by the Attorney General or any other legal body. Next page. Before we open it up for questions, a few things that are of importance for transparency purposes. I offered to each of you three gentlemen the ability to sit down and talk to me offline about this. And only one person accepted that, and that was Commissioner Mullen, to understand what the facts were. Commissioner Peck, well, he just said, no, I don't think I want to have any private meetings with you, and moved along, and then you canceled, Commissioner Dadier, when we tried to sit down and talk about that. So I wanted to make sure that the public hears that and knows that I've tried to talk with each of you individually to try to figure something out, but apparently
Now,
that's
in all
not what
fairness,
we're doing.
Sheriff, you scheduled a meeting with us here in this room, and then you canceled that
What's that
on this topic.
That's
You
not-
scheduled a meeting with us three commissioners, and then you canceled out on that.
No, that's not true.
Commissioner,
I scheduled a meeting with you.
Mr. Gonzalez, did he schedule a meeting with us?
There was an offer to meet, and if my recollection is right, I believe said yes, and then for whatever reason, you decided not to go.
In all fairness, Sheriff. we
Which
just-
meeting was that? What day?
I don't quite remember. It was
emails.
an email exchange.
Yeah.
It was early on in the process. I mean, this was days into it. So, I mean, it was
Well,
it
certainly
was long
sent
ago.
that. I thought you were talking about last week when.
No.
No,
executive
not that.
sessions
This was
called to
early on.
discuss
No,
all
this is when this
stuff.
thing was brewing and the whole thing was going out in the
Oh,
public.
there's lots of emails back and forth.
Well, you canceled on us, Sheriff, before this thing got blown up to where it did right now.
Well, here you go.
So you canceled too?
No, I haven't canceled anything.
You canceled the meeting, Sheriff.
Sheriff, maybe I could just step in here for a minute.
ahead.
Thank you. When you first became sheriff, I remember us meeting one-on-one.
Multiple
And-
times.
Probably. It's been a while, several years. But there's one thing I remember very clearly, and initially I think you might have taken it not as intended, but over the years we've, I think, come to understand one another, and that is that when you're dealing with independent elected officials, we work for the voters, and that it's important for each of us to, as I like to say, quote, stay in our lane, unquote, respect the authorities and the boundaries of the other electeds. And sometimes there's a perception that those boundaries between electeds have been improperly crossed. And that can happen when the Board of Commissioners exercising either our legislative authority or our executive authority as a board in creating policies for the county, like the travel policy. And in creating those policies, it is common for the board to delegate authority to a department, say the auditor's office, to oversee the administration of the policy, not necessarily the legal execution of it. So if someone is thought to be in violation of that county policy, it comes back to the policymakers. It's not for that other elected, in this case, the auditor, to go and take enforcement actions. So I wanted to be
I'm
clear.
sorry, the auditor to do what? Take enforcement action?
Right. Yeah, no, I chose those words intently. So the point is that the authority within this three-person board is legislative. We make the ordinances, the laws of the county. But the executive function essentially makes this board the CEO of the county. And under the executive authority, we are the beginning and the end of the financial purse. And we go through a process under law for creating budgets. We have the authority to reopen budgets and make adjustments as necessary. And the authority approved in a budget for a department to expend public monies has a cap. And regardless of how much additional money somebody brings in, that cap is still there. Now, I will be the first to acknowledge that you have done a superb job of finding outside funding, a lot of it, to meet needs that the county hasn't been able to fund in years, the rescue boats and other examples. So I certainly commend you for that. And I think as a team, all the electeds, we should be more mindful of that. And that's why you've heard me say over the last year or more, when we talk about budgets, how important it is to look at what revenues have come in and to make sure that we're budgeting appropriately. In fact, I made that very comment last week about your budget. I think it was your budget. We were talking about personnel costs. Anyway, long story short, I get where you're coming from. I don't remember the timing of your invitation to come meet with you. I'm happy to meet with you on any county business anytime, with the exception that if there's a pending claim or potential legal action, then it gets a little more complicated. Now, your request may have been before your claim. I don't honestly remember, but
No, it wasn't. In
Yeah.
fairness to you.
so if there's a pending claim on the table over a matter, there's a question about whether or not it's appropriate for me to sit down and chat with you. But outside of that, I enjoy our conversations. They're always spirited, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, you made a couple comments, Commissioner. One is the budgeting process, how it works.
And sometimes doesn't work.
Sometimes doesn't work. And then electeds staying in their own lanes. And I'm pretty sure that's probably what brought us to this today. I've made some statements about claims versus lawsuits. It's easily fixable. We just go backwards, undo this quagmire, and put my card back and engage it. You know, it's not used just to go eat, just so you know. It's used for the operation and business of the Franklin County Sheriff's Office that I have the statutory authority over once the budget's been sent to me, and I have control of, to include mileage, per diems, all these little things that we're trying to make examples of each other out of. For the record, Commissioner Didier, you and I have known each other for a long, long time.
Yep.
And you know that I extended to you to sit down and talk
Yeah.
about all this.
That was
And-
after
and
you canceled the
declined.
meeting with the commissioners. And there was pending lawsuit, and there was a claim filed, so that puts a whole new light on it, Sheriff.
Okay, I don't know.
I just got one-
I'm just offering you a way to resolve this.
Well, I
so
gotta
it
ask
doesn't
you
go
one
any farther.
question. You made a statement and sent an email out that you don't have to follow this policy. Do you have to follow the policy?
Well, I guess that depends on how you interpret policy. That's not my policy. You created a policy that says you will use GSA. We'll use GSA guidelines as a travel policy, and I'm following that policy. You just have an auditor that doesn't like that instead of eating 3 square meals a day, that I ate 1 square meal, and I did it by receipt so that there's no question. You have an auditor, to be, for example, that sends out a picture to the media of my command staff and I having a private dinner, and he thinks that he's gonna leverage that I'm doing something wrong. Well, have at it. And like I say, you and I have known each other for a long time. We actually come from the same school, Commissioner. When you take the gloves off and you want to fight, well, you know what? I'm going to fight to the end, just as you will.
Yes.
And so I'm just telling you that, in fairness, that there's a way to finish it and it not impact county taxpayer dollars. There's some things I know, Commissioner. I, as an individual, and the sheriff have the right to speak under the guidance of the First Amendment. I also have the right of due process, because all those emails you're talking about, you're going to see where I said, no, you're not taking money out of my check without due process and without some sort of hearing, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what happened. What we had an auditor that actually placed me in double jeopardy, if you want to talk in legal terms. Not only did he turn off my financial cards to the county to conduct accountability, but he also then took the money away from me out of my personal paycheck. So he took 2 actions, which equates to double jeopardy. No one wanted to listen to my due process rights in this mess, nor does anybody want to even remotely consider that we have a political campaign page attached to the county. And then when you attach the two and someone disagrees with you, then you block their access or you restrict their right to speak under the First Amendment. Those are the real issues. It isn't about the $21 from the very beginning. It's about the arrogance of elected officials thinking that they can just do these things because they're under some statute. So that's where I'm coming from with that.
And before we resolve this, I want to, or quit this discussion, I just want to say, God bless you, Sheriff. I thank you for standing for our First, our Second, and our Fourth Amendment right, secure in our own person through that COVID epidemic. And I appreciate you as a sheriff. And this is, I tell you what, I'm willing to pay you the $21 back. I know you've turned away checks, but I'm willing to pay this and get it behind us because we don't look good in the public's eye on this deal right now.
Nope.
This
you
is
sure
frivolous, it's petty, and honestly, the picture, I don't know how he took it. He wasn't there.
don't. Yeah, I sent it to him. I sent it to the auditor and says, is this per diem or is this actual cost?
So were you
Actually, I
poking?
sent it
Now,
to-
wait a minute, then, I know in the NFL, taunting's
Hell yes, I'm
illegal.
poking.
You were poking him in the eye, and you don't expect him to respond?
I think he should be smart how he responds. Yeah,
Taunting is a red flag in the NFL, Sheriff.
if you get caught.
All righty, well, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot of talk about Constitution and policies and integrity and honor, and the fact that the financial amount is large or small doesn't change the integrity and the honor piece. And I'll just close my thoughts by saying I believe that great many of the county policies are out of date and need immediate attention. Many of the county policies are, I'll be kind and say they're not artfully written and need to be edited. And it's not a surprise that some of these issues arise when poorly chosen language and policies can give multiple meanings. When a policy says we're going to use the Federal General Services Administration or GSA guidelines and then adds additional county level requirements, that's no different than saying we're going to follow the Constitution, federal law, state constitution, and then a county ordinance adds to that. So they aren't necessarily in conflict unless they say two different things. And in some of our policies, I think that's probably the case. I don't know if it is in this one in particular, but I have a very different view of how things were handled during COVID, and we don't need to revisit that here now. But I do acknowledge that independent electeds are entitled to and do have some latitude in how they operate their departments, and it's not for other departments to weigh in and tell them, unless there is a policy in writing approved by the executive branch of the county government, in which case all county employees, all electeds, are bound to follow that. And if and when they find defects in those policies, this board has a duty to remedy and fix those. So I look forward to you sharing with the county administrator particular fixes that you would like to see us make in the policy, because frankly, I think flawed policies bring us to where we are today.
Yep, you're exactly right. And one of the missing pieces is you have not got elected officials or employees signing off on policy and given the opportunity to go, well, that's not right, or, well, that's not policy, that's an instruction that you took a significant piece of a paragraph out to fit your argument.
Right, and I would add that there is a distinct difference between coordination and approval. This board approves policy,
Yep.
and elected department heads absolutely should coordinate and there, for many years, and continues to be, apparently, a lack of awareness within county government about what coordination means. So I'll just say it quickly and then I'll be quiet. Coordination doesn't mean you've seen it. When you send something to somebody for coordination, it means they've seen it, they've reviewed it, and they've responded back as to whether or not they agree or disagree, concur, non-concur, or whether it's provided just for information. To send something out to somebody and say you've coordinated with them is simply wrong. And when it comes to these policies, they should be properly coordinated with all the elected department heads so they all can weigh in writing as to what they do and don't agree with. So I think we're on the same page there. Thank you.
We are, and just for the record, so the viewing public knows, I have also sent the commissioners and Mike examples of policy and procedures and instructions and how you keep track of all those things and the changes. The sheriff's office, since about 2016, has been using a product that does all that, so that if I'm looking at a policy and I want to know, has everybody read it and seen it? There's an electronic stamp that shows Brad Peck actually signed and read that. And instructions are not part of a policy.
Does that also include the opportunity to indicate whether you concur, non-concur, or whether it's information only?
Yes, there's comments.
Perfect.
There's comment sections in it.
Good.
Just got to pay the piper.
Yeah, well, if you look at our ASRs, to this day, there's probably only one department that actually indicates whether or not the people who saw it agree, support, or don't. It's just a one-way information, so lots of room for improvement.
All right. Commissioner Mullen?
I just definitely think we need to take a look at the procedure and make it as clear as possible. I think that we have a lot of hardworking people in the courthouse that probably felt they were doing their job, and I support the Sheriff's Department 100%. But we definitely need to take a look at the procedures, have everybody sign off on them, and so everyone has a clear understanding of what's expected and what's to be laid out and followed. Like I said, there is a lot of very hardworking people in this courthouse, and we appreciate each and every one of them. And we should make their job as easy as possible.
Right? No argument.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any other elected or department heads that would like to present?
Well, it seems like since I got referenced there, I figured I'll take an opportunity to give a little bit of input, maybe some feedback. Do you have the ability to pull up a RCW or state website and transfer it from?
I can give it a
laptop?
shot. Honestly, I don't know. Julio could help me out.
Got the guy to do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. He's the guy. Why don't we? Well, let's use that laptop since it's already plugged
If
in.
it's already connected.
Yeah.
Is it on the county website?
Just type in, go open up a browser, type in RCW 42.24.115.
Right here.
Yep. 24115. HTML probably. So if I could take an opportunity, since I was referenced, I guess, a little bit in that, and I didn't realize this was going to be subject of today, so. A couple things. I think a couple things that are interesting to keep in perspective is the prosecuting attorney has a duty to provide the legal advice to the Board of Commissioners. We represent the county as a whole. It was kind of suggested that somehow we don't represent individual elected officials, but we always have to keep in mind that we represent the county. This is somewhat of a unique situation that you've got a individual elected that has filed a claim against the county body. Obviously, I am not going to assist in suing ourselves. We've dealt with that very issue. The sheriff put up a nice citation to the Killian versus Clerk's case, or I'm sorry, the Superior Court judge's case. And this was a reference to a matter where the judges actually hired their own special deputy prosecutor to initiate litigation against the county. Obviously, we don't support. I've got enough work to do. I don't need to sue myself, essentially, and try to negotiate that. But one of the issues that I think is interesting that has come up here, though, is trying to figure out how do we resolve various issues that have come up. And I think the sheriff does highlight some good points as far as the idea of travel policy. He and I have had similar conversations where sometimes we elect to go to Olympia or the West Side for a meeting, and it always seemed ludicrous to us that if we drive the same day because we got up early, we travel there, we have 4 hours or so worth of meetings, and we come back that same day, we didn't stay overnight. And by electing not to stay overnight and incurring additional expense, we're not entitled to per diem. So it's rather interesting concept that we're generally saving the county taxpayers money when we make those elections. It just seems odd. It becomes a taxable fringe benefit, so oftentimes we just elect not to turn in the charge or whatnot for per diem. The interesting thing about this policy, and I think it's important for everybody to understand, the auditor's office is basically in a unique role. The only entity in a county that can authorize the P card or the credit cards is the elected body, the legislative body. That is the sole authority. When this issue first came up, I thought, well, Sheriff, just get your own card. Go out and get your own, because if you've got to get expenses, it makes sense to me. I got a phone call when I was returning from travel, and I said that, and then I ended up finding this RCW that essentially highlights that it's only the Board of County Commissioners essentially that can do that. And that's important to understand, because essentially then the auditor's office is the de facto function for ensuring that whatever policy this board lays out, the auditor's office will detect. And if they come up across something that says, hey, wait a minute, there was an expenditure that exceeded the GSA per diem amounts, in other words, if you opted not to eat breakfast or opted not to do lunch and chose to have a more expensive dinner, there is a way to accommodate that. You don't put it on the P card, you just elect to have per diem. And Sheriff and I have had that discussion, and I think I appreciate the Sheriff's perspective from what I've gathered from him over the years, is that he wants to be able to validate where he has spent his exact money. Instead of getting the per diem as a daily allotment, he wants to be able to show, hey, look, this is exactly what I've spent. I've had similar questions with my office administrator, and what I decided is that, well, the per diem is actually in some ways cheaper, because when you return from travel, if you have to bring all the receipts, somebody's got to process those receipts. They've got to review that additional documentation on a per cost basis. So I basically, in the end, it was explained to me that, hey, if you're saving $5 a meal off your per diem because you expended it on the county charge card, it causes additional resources to be used both in the auditor's office as well as in my own office to process those receipts. But surely I understood the process of what the sheriff was trying to do as far as identifying what expenses. A couple of things were discussed as far as other cases, and one of them was highlighted as the Blaisdell case. This involved a matter where the independent elected coroner came to the commissioners for additional funding for doing an inquest. And this was at a time where prosecutor's office, we didn't need that as a tool. That was what the independent elected, and I supported the independent elected's position to go ahead and do the inquest. I didn't need to do it. I didn't need to have a procedure to determine cause and manner of death, which is the purpose of an inquest. But I certainly supported the idea that an independent elected could certainly ask for that funding, and it was certainly within their right to seek that funding from the board. That was what that issue was that was indicated on there. We also get involved over times trying to resolve conflicts between offices, trying to resolve disputes. That's kind of our role. I think sometimes we play a role of mediator. trying to resolve disputes. I've met with folks in the auditor's office on this issue, as well as spoke to the sheriff at length about the issue. I think I've understood a lot of the issues that have come about. The issue of due process was brought up, and I believe there's quite a bit of communication back and forth where the auditor's office first detected that, hey, this appears to be an expense on a P card that actually exceeded the per meal per diem. And I believe the information that I recall is that there was not an election for breakfast or lunch, either because that was provided from another entity or whatnot, so you wouldn't be allowed to collect it. But anyway, that was providing the sheriff the opportunity of saying, hey, look, this exceeded the P card per diem policy. You didn't opt for a per day per diem allotment where it would be evaluated on whether or not you exceeded it. And then that gets into a different conversation on a policy issue. But the auditor's office basically addressed that. They've found this similar issue with folks within their own office when their own employees have traveled, exceeded per diem when there was purchases on a P card. Some people, I think I was told, have had to refund as little as 33 cents to $4 or $5. So this has been something that seems consistent. They notify the employee, they notify, give an opportunity to the person that used the card, identifies what the limit was, and then there's a process of being able to address that. The one highlight that I think is important to recognize is this RCW, the 4224115. This is basically gives the authority, and it's pretty clear language that the auditor has in trying to pursue when they detect what does not appear to be consistent with a policy. Again, this is not an argument whether or not such policies could be improved with changing. But if you look in subsection 2 on this policy that's here, it says any charges against the charge card not properly identified on the travel expense voucher or not allowed following the audit required shall be paid by the official or employee by check, United States currency, or salary deduction. And then you go further down, essentially, and it says, let's see here. Subsection 3 starts, any official or employee who has been issued a charge card by a municipal corporation or political subdivision shall not use the card if any disallowed charges are outstanding and shall surrender the card upon demand of the auditing officer. So essentially, this is the role that is designated by statute that authorizes the auditing officer here, the auditor's office, to go ahead and turn off control. Now, this board has authority to monitor this system and can review it. One thing that I think should be, and I think the sheriff did a good job of highlighting potentially the need for a revision to the policy, is that when it can be shown that the individual, whether that be an elected official, as this statute refers to, any official or officers or any employees using a P card, if it can be shown that the election for a use of a meal expense or individual expense can save the county taxpayers money, then just simply identify that in the form and it would be subject to approval. I know that, I think the sheriff and I have talked a lot about other policies or previous policies where it really defers to the elected or department head for authority or approval if there is such deviations, just simply because I think the public recognizes that if an elected official is seen as abusing a particular policy or expending funds that don't consist with the values of the electorate who put those individuals in office, they'll ultimately make that decision. And I think that's kind of consistent with what the sheriff and I have spoken to, is he chose to exercise use of a card because it shows transparency of exactly what was purchased. It shows that in totality, I believe, that the expenses were lower than by claiming a per diem basis. And so I certainly concur. The idea of reviewing the policy, trying to improve it, especially if we're trying to talk about including language that allows deference for an elected official to point out or highlight, hey, I could actually save money and here's why. It makes sense to cover the sheriff's or other officials' meal expense because they chose to do same-day travel. It would make sense because there is other language, I think, in the policy where the elected has the authority if, for say, per diem if you have employees doing official work and it's inconvenient or does not make a economic sense to have them leave that particular work site to go eat, sometimes it's deemed appropriate. You could have this situation oftentimes with the sheriff's office. They get called out on emergencies, often at scenes for long hours. Due to the remote nature of various scenes, such expenses are going to have to be authorized to provide for employees so that they could continue to do the citizens' work. I just think it's important to highlight that I think here we have two different independently elected officials trying to fulfill their duties as designated by statute. This one basically says that, look, it says right here under Section 3, a municipal corporation or political subdivision shall have a prior lien against and a right to withhold any and all funds payable or to become payable to the official. So the auditor's office had reached out. There was communication back and forth, opportunity to come in and explain to the board hey, just explain to the board. The board is the one that can authorize exceptions. The board has that authority. We hadn't got to that point yet, and so of course the P card becomes due, and under this statute, the auditor's office is trying to follow that, as well as his office is trying to follow the statute that basically says, look, if you don't get that refunded, collected, you turn off the card. The biggest question that I think is before the board is the board has the authority to authorize the card to be activated. This is basically the first instance that I've been made aware of where the sheriff had an issue with a P card where there was an expense that was not covered at the time that it was due, and so it went to the full process of pulling it from the salary or the next paycheck to cover that expense that was deemed over. I think the board could look at this and figure out, look, if we have an understanding of, this is what the parties are trying to do, this board can authorize that P card to be turned on. I think the sheriff's office has other cards that are available. I think it was just the individual card of the sheriff, and I think there's a question of whether or not there's a future question of whether or not there's an understanding of the policy. I think the sheriff and I concur, and probably many others, that this policy probably does need to be evaluated. I think the sheriff did a good highlight of how you can have a policy that's very rigid and would actually incur additional taxpayer dollars if you were to follow this expense to its T. And I think there probably does need to be an allowance to say, look, if you were authorized, just for an example, up to $75 for that day, and you went over one meal's expense to $51 or whatever it was, but that's all you expended for the county instead of using the full $75 that the person would be authorized, that's certainly something that can be considered. The real question for the board is the policy that was in place before. I recognize and I would concur with the chairman's idea that, look, I'd like to pay the $21.75 myself. This obviously is a lot of money and expense for an issue, but I think the question really is, and we've had this issue come before the board before, if we've had employees that have to repay issues when there's pay issues, we have employees that had to do it. We've had elected officials have to do the same thing, and sometimes that's problematic, but what we're doing is we're following the then policies that were in place at the time, and there's always room to figure out prospectively what do we do to avoid such issues like this. So I just want to give the board kind of the perspective as prosecuting attorney, as it was referenced there, is yes, we do give advice. We do give advice to individual offices. Obviously, when there's disputes between one office and another, that's rather difficult. We continue to advise the board. And usually that we don't go into an executive session with a claimant to discuss the very issue of the basis of the claim. And that's why Just, I wanted to clarify that for the public's sake, is we don't do that with other claimants, because if there is another party out there that's filing a claim with the county, if we invite them into executive session, there's really no purpose for the executive session. The executive session is for the privileged communication between the board with their legal counsel. And if you invite the party that's claiming or suing the party, clearly they're not going to be bound to any of the discussions, privacy with the board. Executive session serves a very important point, and that gives the opportunity for each and every board member to have candid discussion with counsel, to ask counsel questions in confidence that, hey, the board can get that legal advice that the board needs to make a decision for the entirety of the county. And that's kind of the difficulty for our job. As prosecuting attorney, we give advice to everyone in the county. We obviously want to make sure that we're compliant, and that includes every office, every department. Sometimes when there's disputes that arise, it may require going outside. I don't think this is a situation that really requires outside counsel or referral to the AG's office. I think the law is pretty clear. The real question is does the board want to set this on a future agenda date so that we could maybe address maybe some of the improvements we could talk about? But really, ultimately, we're talking about how do we resolve the current issue. The current issue of this appears to be over the per diem or GSA limits. I think I recognize too the sheriff's point is that if he did not expend what he would have potentially been able to claim for the entirety of the day but went over on one particular meal, it's still a cost savings to the county. And that's really the question. I don't have all of that detailed information in front of me, but I think there's certainly room for prospectively to discuss how we could always improve the policy. I just wanted to give my perspective is that, look, we've looked at some of these statutes. This is one of the statutes that's highlighted here that it's pretty clear. The auditor just didn't pull this out and do this. They've done this with other employees. They've done it with other elected officials. I think people know that the auditor and I don't always agree on issues, but I think here, in good faith, everybody that was in the auditor's office was reviewing the policy and did their best to try to resolve it prior to the expense coming due. And so that's where we are. That's where we are with the current claim. I think the sheriff was willing to come in and speak to how to improve this policy in the future. Maybe we could connect that with a potential for trying to resolve this dispute so we could put this all behind us. But I think this is one of those things where you have two independent offices doing their job. And I think doing their job of reviewing statutes, trying to comply with the law, trying to comply with the board's policies that have been put in place. And now we're at a place where, okay, maybe there's room for improvement. So
Mr. Sant, with respect to following the law, would you look at the last sentence of what's up there on the screen?
the municipal corporation?
Right. The municipal corporation or political subdivision shall have, we know what the municipal corporation is. That's the county of Franklin. What political subdivision might they be referring to? Would that extend to an elected official in Franklin County? Would that be considered a political subdivision?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so the purpose for the question then is, I don't recall this board, and forgive me if my memory is failing me, but I don't recall this board taking a formal action to revoke this P card. So by what authority was that card revoked?
Under this, I believe if you go back to,
And maybe it's delegated authority in the policy, the travel policy?
it is by statute. Let's see here. Any charges against a charge card not properly identified on the travel expense voucher or not allowed following the audit shall be paid by the officer. And
Sure.
then it indicates, I
That's
think
just the non-payment. I'm talking about the revocation of the P card. It appears to this untrained person, at least legally speaking untrained, it looks like the authority to revoke a P card still rests with this board.
So if you look at the sentence just above that one that you highlighted out to me, it says any official or employee who has been issued a charge card by the municipal corporation or political subdivision shall not use the card if any disallowed charges are outstanding and shall surrender the card upon demand of the auditing officer. So I think that instead of actually physically demanding return of the physical card, the card was just turned off. So it's not going to do, it's basically the equivalent of that is what I've read into it. Yes. And that would have been up to the other section that talks about that.
So then, the card hasn't been revoked, it's just been
It's
turned
been-
off?
I believe it was turned off, and Sheriff, I don't think it's been turned on again on your card. Yeah. So, and that's the real question for the board. So the auditor is under that, but then you go to a different RCW on use of charge cards, and that's 43.09.2855, where essentially a local government may contract for issuance of the credit cards. The legislative body shall adopt a system for distribution of the cards, authorization and control of the use of card funds, the credit limits available on the charge cards, payments of the bills, et cetera, and there's, other items that are generated. One thing that highlights that section, there was a resolution previously brought to the board that actually extended the credit limit for the sheriff's office just because of the very nature of the needs of that office to go above the standard credit limit. There was a previous resolution that authorized that credit limit to be extended. And
So do you think there is a meaningful distinction between revocation and, quote, turning off a card? That's question one. And question two is, who has the authority to turn off a card? Is that delegated to the auditor?
it says by demand of the auditing officer, so that suggests, that language is pretty clear that it is the auditing officer who is basically serving this function by authority of the board. The board has the authority to develop a policy, authorize who can use a card, and then the auditing officer is the one that's entitled to operate the best they can.
And I see the auditors here, has there been a request for the sheriff to surrender the card? I'm reading out of the statute.
I don't believe so, and the question is, now that this issue has been paid, the question is really for the board of whether or not to activate that P card again. And I think a reasonable question was, in talking with the auditor's office, and if Matt's here, he could address that as well, but there was a legitimate question that, well, if there's not an agreement or an acknowledgement about the existing policy to be followed, I guess, for future, the question is, well, if this is going to be repeated or potentially abused again, then shutting it off for an acknowledgement saying that, look, this is what it is. It doesn't apply, or other issues that would suggest that there's going to be a repeat of this situation until either we modify the policy or whatnot. And I think that was the auditor's rationale for keeping the P card deactivated.
And is there an authority somewhere for the money to be withheld? Did I see that in one of the statutes?
That is in the statute, and that's at the bottom of section 2.
Okay,
It's
and
the
is
last sentence
is
there.
that unique to this P card issue?
It is pretty unique. I've never seen language where it basically gives direction that says shall be paid by the official or employee by check or salary deduction. It also references down in the next section that talks about, let's see here. If you read in the first sentence of 3, it says the municipal corporation, Franklin County, shall have a prior lien against and a right to withhold any and all funds available or to become payable to the official or employee. And so really that's the one that kind of gives us some pretty clear language, is that we shall have a prior lien. Usually we don't see language like that where there's a shall. Usually it's may, permissive, or subsequent. This kind of adopts a policy that, hey, if there's an outstanding amount, and it sounds like there was reference of due process, and I just think there was communication prior to this deactivation issue and prior to the salary deduction issue to come in and address that with this body who has the authority to review and discuss.
Well, listen, one last question then, because we got other things to do, I'm sure, but would it be as simple as an adjustment to the travel policy that said, we follow the GSA guideline, here's per diem. There is an alternative if you're willing to provide itemized receipts that you may exceed any of the GSA meal amounts so long as the total amount doesn't exceed the daily per diem. If we simply put a sentence like that in our travel policy, wouldn't that resolve this particular issue?
I think so. And one of the things that I defer to is the auditor's office for kind of their expertise in that is to make sure it doesn't run afoul of any other IRS
Sure,
regulations or
sure.
rules. But to me, I think a policy that basically says you can either spend up to this amount or a lesser amount so long as it's provided receipts and does not exceed a daily per diem limit.
You follow the GSA per diem with the alternative opportunity if you want to receipt everything to simply demonstrate that the total cost is advantageous, saves the county money.
And I think the sheriff, prior discussions as well as from what he put on the board here, I think that's what he tried to demonstrate is that, look.
Well, clearly, it's just that the policy doesn't
Right.
allow for that, and that's all I'm suggesting is
Yeah.
maybe this is a two-sentence fix to the travel policy, and we can move on.
Yep.
Thanks.
I think that would be great.
Well, that, and you have to leave the GSA guidelines intact. You can't change GS guidelines if that's what the board's going to act, you don't get to alter.
And I think per my conversation with the sheriff, one thing that would probably benefit is we either give a reference to where that table is, so that it's very clear to any user, including, elected officials or to employees, so that they could have reference to a specific table with those GSA guidelines and policies. Because sometimes when we make reference to something as global as that, it took me a while to try to find and navigate, where do you find that at the state website and things
Yeah,
like
well,
that. But-
it's on the county's webpage. You can just Google GSA per diem too. I mean, it's not a hard thing to find, but I would urge, excuse me, urge the parties to just look at whether or not it isn't possible to just craft a simple sentence to give an option B, if in fact it saves the county money. We do it with vehicles, which is spelled out in the statute. You can have a county vehicle in certain cases, and if you'd prefer to use your own vehicle, you can be reimbursed at a rate that is advantageous, meaning less costly to the county. And so why not do it here?
So let me ask a question, Sean.
Yeah.
In the picture that the sheriff sent to the auditor, he mentioned underneath there that he said per diem or reimbursement, you decide. There was no mention of P card.
Right.
If he would have went with per diem or reimbursement, he would have been reimbursed, correct?
My understanding is that if he,
No, the
right.
caption of you saying per diem or reimbursement, if he would have put in for reimbursement, he would have got the full amount, correct?
If you put in for per diem and you were eligible for all three meals,
Mm-hmm.
and I use $75 just as an example out there. If you did not have breakfast, you did not submit a lunch
Yep,
per diem
yep.
request, you only used dinner and you went to exact expense. The problem is when you claim then that you're claiming for dinner only, I think that's roughly $35. In this particular instance, I think it was $35. So that overage then is the amount that's determined by the audit to say, hey, that's over the GSA limit. But that's why having maybe a policy change that would simply say, look, if you personally elected not to take breakfast and lunch, but you were authorized, in other words, it wasn't provided by a conference or from other sources where you wouldn't have had to pay that, then that could be something the board.
But the red
board
flag
can
was
consider.
thrown up because of the P card usage.
Yes, when you use the
Okay.
P card, that kind of triggers
There you go.
the
And it's-
following.
And it's
of
only
the-
1 year old we've had P cards. A little over a year. We've only had these for a little over a year, correct?
I think we've had them longer than that, but I think the policy has been recently changed or modified. But we've had a P card in our office for several years.
Well, I looked into that.
I'll answer that for you. The P cards have been in place since 2014, I believe. I was issued P cards for my organization in 2015. Had them ever since. This is just the first time that someone shut off my P card. Then removed the money from my personal wage.
Mr. Chairman, it appears that we've come full circle on this
Yep.
discussion.
Yep.
I'd like for us to move on, but I would
Well,
seek
we're
the board's consensus in asking the auditor to propose an adjustment to the county policy that would provide for a secondary option, if it's lawful, wherein a
have-
person could apply for actual reimbursement for a meal that exceeds the per diem amount, so long as it is receipted and doesn't exceed the eligible per diem for that day. by putting that into policy, I would hope that would make it lawful, and I would just ask the auditor to investigate whether or not that idea, that option is in fact viable, because I believe it would solve this whole issue.
So we're still in elected and department heads, and I see the auditor is at the mark.
When he's done, you're good.
If the board doesn't have any question, I don't have anything further. Although I would like to say, it was nice last week to have.
Excuse me, Mr. Sant,
Yeah.
I was seeking consensus from the
Oh, sorry.
board, and I'm just looking to see
I
if-
want to hear from the auditor before consensus.
Okay, that's fair, thank you.
Just one more thing on the elected business. It was helpful last week when we had our meeting on a Wednesday. I just asked the board to reconsider that. I remember when I raised that issue on Tuesday meetings. Sometimes not only it's a challenge for us because both myself right now and Daniel have a pretty considerable amount of cases in the criminal side. We need to be in court. I'd asked the board if they might consider that Wednesday meeting option. And here's the other thing. I think it is a benefit. I know in talking to support staff that have to get things together, typically if we have a Monday holiday, that does shorten the opportunity for preparation of the board. But I would just throw that out there as a request to maybe look at if it's.
Well,
more-
since I've been a commissioner, it's been Tuesday meetings,
Yeah.
but prior to my becoming a commissioner, they were
Mondays.
Wednesday meetings, correct?
I think, I believe.
That's
it was-
correct.
Yeah, they were moved to Tuesday.
Yeah, and I objected to it at that time for
Okay.
that same issue. And so it was nice to have that again back on the Wednesday. Again, I don't know because obviously that could conflict with the board's other committee meetings or other assignments.
I think we should consider it.
Especially if it gives staff that additional time when we have the 3-day weekends where.
And help you be in the room. We need you in the room.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
I
right.
don't think we should do them on Monday or Friday, but any other day of the week, I'm fine.
He's saying Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Mr. Auditor, Mr. Beaton.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I do have to say, this entire affair has been surreal in the amount of resources and time that we have dedicated to this, but it's all there. I can tell you, your consideration of the policy, as you heard from Mr. Sant and some of the meetings I've had with him, I don't know of anybody that's had an issue with the policy. We had another elected who traveled and there was a misunderstanding. And when this happens, there is reminders. We'll tell them, hey, here's how it works. It's important, I get this on the record, and I hope this is the last time I ever speak to this particular incident. But there's a way we do this. I mean, when it comes in, it's not me. Everybody keeps talking about the auditor and the sheriff. In this case, it is the sheriff because he had the expenditure. But I, in fact, never weighed in until after there had been all of the social media and then all of the things that were said about the staff, things that were said publicly. It just kept escalating. And so what happens is it'll come in, just like it happened with the other elected official in the office. It gets, something gets recognized, then they're notified, and then when there's a disagreement, we say, point to in the policy where you believe this applies, and then we do it again and again, and typically we're working with staff, and there's a connection with the elected official, and then we always, just like we did with the other elected official, we want them to come I then, in this matter, I went and visited with Mike. Shortly thereafter, I got another email saying I'm the problem. And so that's when he tried to set the meeting up. The meeting was canceled. And then it just kept escalating. And in the end, just for the record, despite what everybody thinks or remembers or doesn't remember, the reason this went as far as it did is there's a tremendous amount of antipathy towards the auditing process. My staff has been called names. Their names have been used, their employees, they've been brought up in the public. It's very stressful. It's the photo he's referencing, he didn't send it to me. He sent it to my staff and to Mr. Gonzalez. And so they're the ones that are under this pressure. They're trying to implement your policy. And by the way, it's a policy that no one has ever had a problem with. It's actually grown out of this process that for some reason, this particular card user didn't want to go through, actually said the policy doesn't apply to me. And I stand here saying, what else would anybody expect me to do? And I've gotten a lot of feedback, and quite frankly, I didn't weigh in till the end, and I'm sorry I have to weigh in now. If the board should happen to want to change this policy, you know, we can look at it. Just so you know, if you talk to staff, nobody's had a problem with this, and if they have, you guys already have a relief process in place in which the person can come and visit with the board and work through it, or pay the money, but I mean, to change a policy under these circumstances, I think it would be more instructive to find out exactly, you know, if this is needed, or if this is just, you know, something that's an outgrowth of something that really just got out of hand. I hate to tell you, it was just staff. I mean, we sent a reminder, and there was an email that said, don't bother sending me reminders. You know, so as it moved through this, the kind of the taunting, the name calling, and then it got up to the end where I met with the PA staff. I mean, what choice do we have? And so at the end, you know, the authority was pretty clear. And then there was a suggestion that this process in some way inhibited justice. I mean, we have to stay connected to reality. The fact is, he can still spend money and just expense it until this matter is resolved. And the matter needed to be resolved by something like this. And that is where the board that has the authority to create the policy and manage the policy. And by the way, if someone, I mean, I know Prosecutor Sant shared with me an incident on a P-card case that he found. And the reason this is written this way is so that you guys know that it's pretty easy to shut it off and bring the person in and have the conversation. And if in some cases, if it wasn't somebody, or if it was large expenses, it can get out of hand very quickly. And so that's why I think they wrote this RCW for the auditing officer to shut it off. And then, and again, you know, to have this conversation, and that is, you know, it's no different than any other RCW, whether it's a speed limit or anything else. And the problem we had here was that after after the card user disagreed with this law, they then filed a public records request that resulted in 59,000 emails that need to be gone through, as well as then filed an intent to sue. And so what I think is important, if we want to talk about policy changes anywhere that you have electeds implement for you, that it's just a political time that we're in. Let's identify what really went on here. And it had nothing to do with a poorly written policy. It had to do with the person who thought the policy didn't apply to them and then didn't want to resolve it with the board. And so if the question, this board can do whatever it wants, and again, we implement your policies, but I think it's critical that we identify what really went on here. And I think it's inappropriate, you know, and this time it was my staff that were called names and, you know, called out on social media. This is inappropriate behavior for any of us to do. And so that's what I just, as sure as my staff is listening to me right now, that's the only reason I'm sitting here, is that quite frequently the electeds get together and, you know, whether it's my staff who's had to pay back, I don't know, I've heard from a bunch of them. Well, I had to pay back $3. Well, I had to pay back this. Well, I had to pay back that. And I don't know about any of those. And I didn't know about the other elected that had to pay back, I think he paid back $400 or $500 in travel expenses, and chose not to come to this board, just chose to do that. So that's really where I'm at. And like I said, I hope it's the last time I speak to this. And if the board should happen to want to rewrite this policy, that's fine. I would recommend we do that in a much broader, I mean, the frustration people have with fringe benefit and IRS rules, you know, as much as you want to, you know, there was a suggestion that even on some of these fringe benefits with the uniforms and whatnot, these are issues that are constantly changing, and the county is fortunate enough to have, you know, staff that reads this stuff and tries to get it right. And so, you know, I guess that's all I have to say, was that the progression was that, you know, it doesn't apply to me. I'm not going to go stay in your own lane, you know, and then when the law, we went to the PA, we did it the way you would want us to do it. And any other person would have had the same opportunities to come to this board. And yet here we are spending 2 more hours talking about this. And so it's really simple. No matter what policy you pass, it has to apply to everybody. And so that's hopefully my final word on this particular situation, because the record is out there, and it only became, the taunting photograph only became public after there was another, something else put out there. So again, my hope would be we would find out what the actual impact is, how many people actually have had a problem with that particular, are we talking 20 people? It was your policy. Have we had one person, or have we had 20 people? I mean, how many people have had confusion over that policy? If it's one, well, you guys should keep that in mind, and, but absolutely, we should always improve policies based on information. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
So Commissioners, just a couple things. Let me reiterate to you again, the picture that got let out to the Tri-Sierra Herald has nothing to do with any of this. And it's a dangerous path people are taking when they're trying to tie that to this issue, because it has nothing to do with this issue. It's a false perception that's being put out there. Secondly, you have a bullying harassment policy. I actually have copies of it if you'd like, because we've expanded ours from that basic practice. And calling people bean counters is not harassing. It's just not. And so the final piece is come into each of your emails, and to Mike's email, and to the prosecutor's email, is all the receipts of my travel and my usage with explanations, with auditor staff have approved them and sent them through up until now. And so you'll all have copies of those. They're in JPEG form, just so you know. And you too, Mike. And then, of course, the prosecutor, when we talk about practice. And when you read RCWs, unless it's a succinct, like the auditor has authority to shut off P cards, then kind of what if, maybe. Yeah, they're generalities. But just be careful when you read RCWs and try to apply things, because sometimes they're not as they seem. And then finally, the prosecutor of the county does have a responsibility by law, by RCW, to represent all electeds, with the county being the #1 priority. And the point of the cases is so that you can look and see what took place with those matters.
Hey, Sheriff, real quick, does that duty to represent all electeds include if cases where that elected is threatening or claiming against the county? Doesn't that create a conflict?
Well, I think you'll find in one of the cases that because of the conflict, the county prosecutor hired a guy named Del Kammerer to represent the disputed in that, and the
So when
county
you say
paid for that attorney.
represent, when
and the
you say
county paid-
represent, really what you meant was provide representation. His office actually doesn't represent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And then when Del Kammerer actually sued the county, then he turned off the representation.
All right. Looks like we got another department head coming forward.
I'll make this quick.
Elected official, I should say.
With the P card, the evil word here, I think there needs to be training throughout the departments. When I came in, I was issued one. I returned all my receipts and I was told, don't use your receipts, we just do per diem. I spent less than I would per diem, but I was still told, go that route. I use my P card to pay bills with, because I have myself and one other guy in the office. I don't have someone to, we can't always, we're out in the field, we can't pay bills. And sometimes with the bills being paid, they're always late. So like, for example, I have my cell phone on auto pay, so it goes on my P card. I've recently received an email from the auditor's office saying that anything according to resolution, and this resolution was done in 2001, which we have people working here that weren't even born at that time. So I think it's time to update, that anything with an invoice needs to be run through one solution. which I do, it's all under the umbrella of the Umpqua P card, but I was told that I can't do that anymore, that I have to run each one separately. There's items that I buy once a year that I use out in the field. I don't have time to generate a vendor number and all that kind of stuff for once a year. And it might not even be the same vendor next year because I'll find a cheaper price. So I use my P card for those things. So I would just propose that we look at looking at that and maybe update that. It also was highlighted that anything over $3,000 has to be approved by the board for approval. That was in 2001. There's a lot of things now you can't buy for, and I have never spent $3,000 on my card, but so I just would propose that we look at updating that and having some people look at that and redo it. Thank you.
Thank you. One last ask, any other electeds or department heads? All right, seeing none, we'll move down to administration office business. Mr. Gonzalez.
Commissioner, permission to speak on the P-card policy, if you
Absolutely.
wouldn't mind, because
No,
my
absolutely.
name has been mentioned quite a bit in this, and I do have a perspective. I've tried to play Switzerland in this, but it's been challenging. But I certainly think I need to weigh in on it. And I was actually writing some words as everybody was chatting, so I'll just read it. I think it's incredibly challenging for me as the county administrator to have to look at our citizens in the eye and tell them that we are actually fighting over $21 and policies that perhaps maybe we should look at when there's so much important work to do in this county, and we do it every single day. Franklin County was born out of incredible strength to get the job done. Commissioner Didier, as you know, we have a proud past, a pioneer past that's beyond belief. Drylanders, cultivators of wheat fields, builders of irrigated blocks, railroaders, dam builders, paper mill workers to Hanford executives now. It has not been easy for us in Franklin County, but we have survived, we've thrived. It's an attitude that we can make things work. That brings us back to where we are today in this county. We are fighting over $21, a policy that we can easily look at, and a political wrestling match that is making us look foolish, quite frankly. We must expect better, orchestrate harmony, stay laser focused on our goals and objectives, and believe we can do it. And what inspired me to do this and to say this, I'm not trying to be on some kind of stump, but yesterday in my director staff meeting, I had an employee who had returned from leave, and they'd say they'd never seen the morale in this courthouse in this state. They've been here 20 some odd years. They said our employees are tired, exhausted from political discord, fighting between elected officials, and the feeling that the non-elected employees and staff members are the collateral damage in all of this. Commissioners, I say enough is enough. Let's pay back the sheriff his money, turn on the card. Let's work together as a team to come to some sort of agreement on this P-card policy. You just heard Curtis. It's not clear in some regards. We need training. Commissioner Peck said we can add a line to it for clarity. We have to do this together. We must do this together, because divided, we're going to die fighting over things that are not important to our citizens. So that's all I wanted to say. So.
Any other administration office business?
No, sir.
Thank you. Very well done. Takes us down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? I know we don't have anybody on the phone.
On a lighter note, the 22nd, I believe, it's not this Saturday, next Saturday, the Sheriff Foundation is holding an event at Eagle Lakes Ranch. It's a wonderful event. It benefits the people. It's a lot of fun. I believe the Bookers will be doing the auction they did last year. There's a live auction. There's a silent auction. Carl Anderson is catering, I believe, again. If you haven't had his food, it's amazing. I know that there are a few fun items up for auction. I don't know if you guys follow hunting, but there's a gentleman named Sparky Sparks. He owns Living the Dream. It's a TV hunting show. He also has a fishing show too. He has donated a weekend turkey hunt next spring that he will personally be the guide, and it will be televised later that year. So that's one of the items up for auction. It'll be fun, and I encourage everyone to go to the Facebook page, the Sheriff's Office Foundation. You'll find it on Facebook. They do have tickets available. They're $125 a piece, or a table of 8 for $800. Save you a little bit of money if you can get a group. It's a lot of fun. Encourage everyone to come out.
Thank you. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, I believe we have a couple executive sessions, correct?
Yes, sir. We do have 2 executive sessions. I would imagine around 20 minutes. First being,
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, we're 2 hours into this meeting. I'd like to get about a 10-minute recess, please.
Okay. So at this time, we'll recess for 10 minutes. All right, we come back from recess. We're back to regular session. At this time, we're going to recess into executive session. Mr. Gonzalez, will you take us into the first one?
Yes, Chair. This should take about 15 minutes. This first one, RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, Subsection I, to discuss with legal counsel matters relating to agency enforcement action, litigation, or potential litigation.
Okay, at this time, we'll recess into executive session at 11:30.
This one maybe 10 minutes
Okay.
at the most.
All right, we've come out of exec session, and we are going to recess into another exec session. Mr. Gonzalez, will you?
Yes, Chair. This is under RCW 42.30.110, Section 1, Subsection B, real estate acquisition or site selection.
And for 10 minutes?
For 10 minutes, sir.
So at
Yes, sir.
this time, we'll recess into exec session at 1:21:30. He's got to get the door open. Okay, we've come out of executive session. We're back to regular session. Is there any other business for the good of the county?
No, sir.